Welcome to Stories in Stanza. I am your host Abhra. I am a poet and I created this podcast to bring you a montage of real stories that make life beautiful as poetry. Some stories are my own and some are from the wonderful people who have chosen to join me as guests and bring their incredible journey. Stories include a creator's passion or unfolding branches of human emotions in the face of failure, or unfamiliar chapters from the past that remind us about the richness and vastness of life. Embark on a voyage of exploration, contemplation, and motivation with me. Please join me in welcoming today's guest speaker. Hi Diane, good afternoon and welcome to Stories in Stanza. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to our chat and hear from you about your work on your new book. Before we get started, could you introduce yourself for our audience, please?
My name is Diane Clarke, and I had my first book published this year on the 1st of May. It's taken a while to get there. I'm not an overnight success by any means. I took up writing when I retired, and it's taken probably 8 or 9 years to get to this point of having my first book out there. So it's been a very exciting time for me.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to know about your book and the work you have put behind this book, your research, all those untold stories. First, tell us about your book a little bit, what it is called and what this is about and who this is targeted to.
The book's called The Photographs, and the central mystery of the story concerns what happened to a little girl during the World War II evacuations. If your listeners are not familiar, when the war broke out in the UK in 1939, the government gave families the opportunity to move their children away from cities that they thought would be targeted by bombers to the safety of the countryside. And my main character, Carol, who we actually don't meet until she's in her late 50s, always believed that she left London with a brother, but she has never been able to find any trace of him. And because she was raised by a single mother who sadly passed away shortly after they were evacuated, there is no family to fill in the gaps for her. And the host woman who took them in adopts Carol. And she always tells her that this boy doesn't exist, that she didn't arrive with a brother. But at the very start of the story, a momentous happens. She finds a photograph and there is a boy in the picture. And it's the first piece of evidence that she's ever had that this boy might have existed and may still be alive. And that sets her off searching again. Even though she's tried and failed, it sets her on a search path again. And then the second part of the book, Carol is now in her 80s. It's her daughter who is still trying to help her reconnect with this brother. And that happens in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. But the daughter has a secret and she is forced to face up to it during this period and has a lifetime of memories knowing the damage that secrets can do because of what's happened to her mum. And so she has a choice to make. Does she bury that secret or does she face up to it as well?
Thank you for telling us about the book. It's a very interesting context, and history being one of the most interesting pillars in according to me in fictions. So I really look forward to know a little bit more. And before we get into in this questions phase, can I request you to share something from the book, anything from your choice, so that our audience can get to know and have a little bit more intimate feeling about the book?
Okay, I'm going to read about that momentous moment. Carol has found a teddy bear in her stepmother's garage. She brings it indoors. They're sharing a cup of tea. And she says, "Cute little thing, isn't he? I wondered if it was mine." She, that's the stepmother Gwen, put her cup on the bedside table and reached for the bear. Her mouth slackened. "Do you recognize it? He looks new, as if he was never played with." Her head shook firm. "No, I don't. It was in a shoebox. Probably been there for ages. Can't think of any other child who owned it, can you?" "It's a mystery. Probably best given to the charity shop. Why don't you take it tomorrow?" I tensed. Could I have brought it with me when Mum and I first came to stay? "It's too new. Besides, I'd remember something like that." "Is it? It looks vintage. Here, hand him over. Maybe there's a maker's mark. Wouldn't it be great if he turns out to be one of those famous German brands? They can fetch a fortune at auction." She sniffed. "It won't be." "What makes you so sure? Come on, let me see." I swiveled to put my cup on the dresser and held out my hand. Gwen reluctantly passed the bear to me. Looking for a label, I turned him this way and that, then laid him on his stomach. Brushing a hand over the waistcoat, I noticed a change in texture. The tweed skated over something smooth. Prying apart a space at the back of his little neck, I stuck my finger inside and touched paper. Something's rammed under his waistcoat. If these buttons come undone, we might be onto something. As the buttons unfastened and the material gaped open, a small black and white photograph slipped out. I turned towards Gwen. She beckoned me to hand it over. Instinctively, I clung on. "Give it to me." "1 second." I shifted sideways, turning away from the bed. The image focused on a small group of people in an impromptu pose. Behind them, a vast crowd of adults and children stood on a station platform, carriages idling in the background. The lens captured a young woman crouched on her haunches, clinging on to a child. The girl, young, possibly 3 or 4, was pulling away from a kiss the woman was trying to plant on the toddler's head. An older boy was by her side, body at an angle, his face obscured. A large cotton bag hung from his shoulder, filled with objects that bulged through the thin fabric. They carried gas masks in cardboard boxes. The woman grinned, presumably entertained by the girl's antics, though there was something else, something contradictory. Who were these people? Gwen stuck out a flat palm. "I said I wanted to see, please." Handing it over, I watched her closely. She swallowed hard, setting off a gravelly cough. After several grating hacks, she lay back on the pillow, the photo lowered onto the eiderdown. I leaned forward, drawn to the figures, my vision slipping back to the girl. She was holding a teddy bear with a checked waistcoat, most probably made of tweed. The same bear. My breath caught in my throat. Was the toddler me? More importantly, could this be my real mother? Too young to remember her before she died, and with no other visual record, I've been forced to imagine her appearance my entire life. Tears brimmed as I examined her features for the first time. She looked young, not beautiful, but pretty, with her hair curled into a wartime quiff. No doubt this was a scene from our evacuation from London, and I had brought the bear with me.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a very intriguing point in the novel. And I was looking at the book cover and I was trying to imagine what the photograph would look like. The cover is also beautiful. It tells a story, it draws you into that moment. I want to hear from you as to how you prepared for this book, how you did your research on this book. Can you share your untold stories and behind that became the story?
Yeah.
Sorry, by mistake, I stopped to pause the recording. Yeah, let's go on.
I actually, placing it in that year, 1939, that came later. The story actually was inspired by watching a documentary about brothers, two brothers, one of whom lost his memory and the other brother filling in the gaps in his brother's childhood, essentially, except that something terrible had happened to the boys, and the brother with the memory chose not to tell his sibling to protect him, really, from what had happened to them. But that caused enormous problems between them in later lives. And I just thought, what would it be like to lose your memory or to be so young that you can't rely on your memories of something major that had happened in your life? So that was the kernel of the story, with Carol being so young. You know, she has this feeling, this sense of a brother, but nothing that she can really cling on to in a concrete way. And then I had the idea of a brother going missing, and I think it was, again, my family actually talked a lot about the war years. I'm the youngest in my family, and so my parents actually lived through the war. They weren't evacuees, but the evacuation story used to come up about children being moved to the countryside. And I started to look at photos of that, and photos do exist. Clearly, it was such a big event that newspaper photographers turned up to record the moment. And it's chaos. It's just chaos. And when you know about the numbers of children that were moved in those first few days of September, and actually children didn't go missing. This is the incredible thing. I only came across one story where someone said that they lost touch with a sibling. They'd never seen a sibling again. So it wasn't something that happened a lot, but equally the circumstances of the evacuation, with all those children being taken to the countryside, mainly in their school groups. It was organized through the schools, not through parents. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a child to go missing. And so that was the part one of the story, about a child going missing, a perfect opportunity for that to happen. And then the issue then of how much that child is able to remember with accuracy about whether she really had a brother or not.
It's like, thinking about it, it's taking me back in time. And you have captured something from the Second World War up till COVID. So it's a big time frame and a couple of generations to cover. So how did you handle that? What was the preparation for that?
Yes, as I mentioned, we don't actually meet Carol till she's in her late 50s. So there is the wartime timeline, if you like, although it's not about Carol's evacuation experience as a whole. It's really just about whether she arrived with a brother. She was so young, and she was adopted by Gwen at a very young age, and she had a very happy life with Gwen. So in some ways, it's not a it's not a terrible, she didn't have a terrible upbringing. She was loved and cared for by Gwen. A lot of stories, a lot of other authors have really focused on what it was like for children during the evacuation. And that isn't really part of mine. As I said, we meet Carol as a late middle-aged woman still searching for her brother. And then in the 2000, so I was able to move it forward to 2020, knowing that Carol could still have been alive, that she's in her 80s, but she is still alive at that point. And the reason I chose the COVID era was because it was another major time in all our lives that involved separation of families, people not being able to spend time with their families. Except, of course, we had all the benefits of modern technology. We could phone each other. We could Zoom each other. And in fact, I have a chapter in that section where the family do a sort of family Zoom call. And of course, Carol in her 80s and her husband struggle with that because they don't really know what to do. But there's a lovely parallel there. The families that were separated during the war years and families separate in 2020 all over the world in the same way that World War II affected so many people around the world.
You told me that in the narrative there are many layers of lies and secrets, and then they get revealed. Do you want to tell us about that?
It was a question that someone else asked me, actually at my book launch, about secrets, and I chose not to have my question and answer session scripted, and it took me by surprise a bit, and I don't think I answered it terribly well at the time. And it was, but afterwards I thought about it and just thought about that. I think we all have a sliding scale, don't we, of what we consider to be okay and what clearly isn't okay in terms of secrets. So the same happens in my book. People are kind. They don't tell family members the truth about something because they're being kind. And if that lie or omission doesn't have any big consequences, then perhaps that's okay because you're doing something for the right reasons. There's one really trivial thing where one of my main characters in the second part says, she's asked, is there anything else? Is there anything else that you haven't told me? And she says, oh, it's just the usual things like whether we really Mum's custard tart or not. Clearly they don't like Mum's custard tart, but they don't tell her. Is that okay? For me, yes, I would say that you're sparing that person's feelings. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter too much. But then there are other secrets that are very consequential, and clearly they're not things that people should keep or not reveal. And there's just that blend of those in the story. So things that I think everybody would recognize as fairly normal, but then other secrets that are much more serious, have much more serious consequences.
I'm curious that the context of the book, is it more about finding the lost brother or more about these relationships within the family and the secrets and revealing of them? What is the main direction of the story?
Oh, I think definitely the search for the brother is huge, and it runs through both parts. As I mentioned at the beginning, Carol is the one searching in part one. And then in part two, it's Megan who's trying to help solve this mystery that's gone on, as you say, for decades and decades. But I think, as I mentioned, Megan, in the end, I think is very influenced by her mother's life and experience in the way that she makes her own decision about the secret that she's keeping. And I think that it's because she has so much love and respect for her mother that she makes the decision that she does in the end. So yes, that family relationships do play a big part. As indeed the search, it is a family matter too. You know, it's a brother, it's an uncle, a great uncle, trying to reconnect people together after a great deal of time has passed.
I'm curious that finding someone, and because the story is based across decades, that would take different turns in different time period based on technology and other things. How did you handle that in your book? Was that challenging? Was that easy?
This is a really interesting question, actually, because you're right. You would think that Megan would have her fingers on all sorts of information. And even Carol. Carol is a teacher. She's not an uneducated woman. Even in the first timeline, 2009, there would have been computers and things like that. But actually, it's because of the way records were kept around the event itself that still makes it very difficult. I belong to a real Facebook group that was set up by an organization in the United Kingdom called the British Evacuees Association. And people post on there regularly about trying to find out where, where they went, or people that they might have met in the town that they were sent to. And sometimes it's the former evacuee themselves, although of course they are all very elderly now. Sometimes it's the children of those evacuees who are interested to know what happened to their mum and their dad. So I mentioned earlier that it was organized through schools. So sometimes schools will have kept records of taking classes of children to a particular country, town or village. But otherwise, there is no centralized record of what happened. And even there's something called the 1939 register. And you think, oh, that would be it. That would be the magic bullet. But it actually isn't. It was primarily done to record people's names and locations for the purpose of issuing ration cards. It wasn't a proper census. Because people were moving around so much at that point in time, not just children, families generally, there was just so much movement of people in those early months of the war. Lots of people are just not on that register. So the only thing I don't know about, because I don't know enough about it personally, is whether something like Ancestry.com would have helped. Because I guess it's possible with a DNA sample to have potentially found a match for Carol. But I didn't include that in my story. Readers might question that and question why I didn't do that. But I guess that is certainly an avenue that's available now to find lost family members.
Yes, and the technology has evolved and it works in ways even if we even like maybe a couple of generations ago, it was impossible to think that this could actually work. That's why I was curious. When you worked on the research and everything, so can you tell me something, or like when you were preparing for the book, when you were going through the writing process, what worked in your favor and what didn't work in your favor?
Began the book. The person who helped Carol wasn't her daughter. It was another character altogether who worked for an organisation that I based on the one I just mentioned. So instead of the British Evacuations Association, I've got an organisation called the English Evacuee Society. I think I've changed it. And my editor actually felt that it would be so much better if, because I had the daughter Megan existed in that draft, that it would be so much better if it was Megan, rather than a stranger helping, that there would be just so much more investment, I suppose, from the daughter in wanting to help her mum, that you could really use that as part of the story. And another editor who had only seen a really brief outline of the story way back at the beginning asked the question, okay, so there's a lot of historical stuff in here, but what's in it for the modern reader? And at the point where we made Megan the person to help her mum was the moment when I brought that part of the story really up to date. So there was a lot of rewriting that went into both of those changes, as you can imagine. But I had a very good relationship with my editor, and together we worked through that. I love editors. I know a lot of people. I was nervous to begin with at the idea of someone critiquing my work, but I've found them to be so enormously helpful. Really, that this book has changed for the better many times as a result of the suggestions of editors. And I work in fits and starts, really. So I'm not one of those writers that will aim for a certain word count per day. If I'm on a roll, I could write 5,000 words in a day. I'm not saying they're great words, but I'll get stuff down. But then I'll the next day, perhaps I won't be able to write anything. And I've learned to trust myself, to not worry about that if I'm not in the flow and I'm really struggling, that I just need to bide my time, because it usually means I need to think about something. And I'll have those ideas when I'm walking my dog or at 3:00 in the morning. And then when I do feel ready, then those ideas have had time to percolate and make improvements on the sort of the splurge of words that I put down previously.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with Stories and Stanza. I think I have covered everything from my side. Just to conclude today's discussion, would you want to share anything, any message you would like to give to aspiring writers?
I think I've given one already. Editors, it depends what your reason for writing. If you're writing for fun and for pleasure, then just do it. Just do it. If you want to enter competitions, though, if you want to enter short story competitions, or you want to write a novel to enter into competitions or to submit to publishers, then do consider getting the help of a professional editor. They really do know their stuff, and you'll be amazed. So sometimes you can be given an idea and your first reaction will be, no, I don't want to do that. But as often as I've had that thought, I've come back and realized that they were right. You know, that you just need to hold your tongue and think about it. And 9 times out of 10, they're absolutely right. So yes, that would be my advice. And make connections with your local writing community. Get support, go to groups, go to writing groups, critique groups, book clubs. If there's authors talking at your local library, make those connections, because it can be a bit lonely. They can be really helpful to you.
Thank you so much for your advices and your guidance. I wish you all the best for your coming writing projects. And
Thank you.
thank you for taking the time to talk to Stories and Stanza today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. You are listening to Diane Ross talk about her book, The Photograph. If you have enjoyed the author interview, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, or follow us in your choice of podcast platforms. And I'm your host Abhra. I'll be back next week with a new interview. Thank you.